Welcome to the Shadows. You're tuned into Channel 19 Mysteries, and I am your host, Midnight Rider. Picture this. It's the dead of winter. You're driving alone down a desolate, pitch-black stretch of highway. Your headlights are barely cutting through the oppressive, freezing fog. And then, out of the absolute darkness, a figure appears. A young woman, pale, beautiful, standing in the biting wind, wearing nothing but a thin, white dancing dress. You pull over to help. You open the passenger door. She climbs inside. But the crushing, unnatural chill she brings into the car with her isn't from the weather, it's from the grave. While the ancient cobblestone streets of the old world harbor their own tragic ghosts, America's endless ribbons of asphalt hide a very different, far more terrifying supernatural lore. Tonight, we journey to the dark, beating heart of Chicago's Archer Avenue, where classic car culture collides head-on with a phantom who simply refuses to stay buried. Before we shift into drive and let the icy wind inside, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel to join our midnight convoy, and drop a comment below telling me what is the most terrifying thing you've ever seen on a late night drive. Now, let's get into tonight's story. The Dance with Resurrection Mary. While the roads of England hold ancient, tragic histories, the vast, sprawling highway systems of the United States possess a very different kind of supernatural lore. In America, the haunted highway is deeply intertwined with the culture of the automobile itself, and no entity embodies this chilling intersection of classic car culture and the paranormal quite like the legend that haunts the long, dark stretches of Archer Avenue in Chicago. Archer Avenue is one of the oldest and longest continuous streets in the city of Chicago. Originally carved out by Native American tribes as a trail tracing the Des Plaines River, the road eventually became a vital artery for the booming industrial city. By the 1920s and 30s, the road was flanked by dense, sprawling forests, massive slaughterhouses, and a series of enormous historic cemeteries. The most prominent of these burial grounds is Resurrection Cemetery, a massive, imposing Catholic graveyard enclosed by heavy, towering wrought-iron gates. During the Great Depression, young people in Chicago sought temporary escapes from the crushing economic reality. The primary form of entertainment was the massive, bustling dance halls that dotted the city. Young men and women would dress in their absolute best clothing and spend the weekends dancing to big band music. According to local historical records, sometime in the early 1930s, likely 1934, a young, beautiful Polish-American girl, often identified by historians as Mary Bregovy or sometimes Mary Mura, was spending a Friday night at the Henry Ballroom on Archer Avenue. She had a bitter, heated argument with her boyfriend. Furious and deeply upset, she stormed out of the ballroom into the freezing Chicago winter night. She refused to get into his car, opting instead to walk the dark, freezing miles down Archer Avenue toward her home. She never made it. As she was walking along the poorly lit edge of the road, she was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver. Her shattered body was eventually laid to rest within the sprawling grounds of Resurrection Cemetery. But Mary, it seems, never finished her journey home. The sheer volume of highly documented, incredibly detailed encounters with the entity known as Resurrection Mary is staggering. But the most thoroughly vetted, deeply chilling, and widely accepted account occurred in the winter of 1939, and it involved a completely unsuspecting young man named Jerry Palus. Jerry was a typical, hard-working Chicagoan in his early 20s. On a bitterly cold Saturday night in 1939, Jerry decided to go out dancing at the Liberty Grove and Hall, a popular ballroom located near Archer Avenue. The hall was packed, loud, and filled with the smoke of hundreds of cigarettes and the blaring sound of a live brass band. Jerry was standing near the edge of the dance floor when his eyes landed on a stunningly beautiful young woman standing by herself near the bar. She was exceptionally striking. She had pale, porcelain skin, bright blue eyes, and light blonde hair, styled in the classic bob of the era. She was wearing a beautiful, flowing white party dress, sheer white stockings, and small white dancing shoes. She also carried a small, beaded clutch purse. Jerry, instantly smitten, smoothed his suit and walked over to her. He politely introduced himself and asked her for a dance. The girl smiled faintly, nodded, and stepped onto the dance floor with him. But the moment Jerry took her hand and placed his arm around her waist, a deep, unsettling shock ran through his system. Despite the fact that they were in a crowded, sweltering, unair-conditioned ballroom packed with hundreds of sweating bodies, the young woman's skin was violently, unnaturally cold. Jerry would later tell investigators that holding her hand felt exactly like holding a piece of solid ice. Her skin possessed a heavy, clammy texture that made Jerry physically shudder. He politely asked her if she was feeling all right, assuming she had just come in from the freezing Chicago winter. She simply smiled, a sad, distant expression on her face, and told him her name was Mary. Despite her terrifyingly icy skin, Mary was a phenomenal dancer. Jerry spent the next several hours completely enthralled by her. They danced to multiple songs, they chatted quietly, and Jerry felt a genuine connection forming. However, he noted that Mary was incredibly pale, and her eyes seemed to constantly stare past him, as if she were looking at something incredibly far away. Furthermore, despite dancing vigorously for hours, she never broke a sweat, and her skin never warmed up, even a fraction of a degree. As the night drew to a close and the band began to pack up their instruments, Jerry, acting the perfect gentleman, asked Mary if he could drive her home. He knew the winter night outside was brutally cold, and she was only wearing a thin white dress. Mary nodded quietly and accepted his offer. They walked out of the loud, bustling ballroom and into the biting, freezing wind of the Chicago night. Jerry led her to his car, opened the passenger door for her, and she slid into the seat. Jerry climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and turned on the heavy, rudimentary heater. "Where to?" Jerry asked, shifting the car into gear. Mary stared straight ahead through the windshield, her voice a quiet, flat monotone. "Drive down Archer Avenue." Jerry nodded and pulled the car out onto the dark, desolate stretch of Archer Avenue. The drive was incredibly quiet. The lively, talkative girl Jerry had danced with just minutes prior had completely shut down. She sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes locked on the dark road ahead. Jerry tried to make small talk, asking her about her family and where she worked, but she offered only brief, one-word answers. As the car rumbled down the dark, tree-lined avenue, approaching the massive, wrought-iron gates of Resurrection Cemetery, the atmosphere inside the vehicle became incredibly oppressive. The heater was blasting, but the air inside the cabin felt violently cold, radiating directly from Mary's seat. Suddenly, as they drew parallel to the imposing cemetery gates, Mary violently jerked in her seat. She turned to Jerry, her blue eyes wide with a sudden, frantic urgency. "Stop the car!" she shouted. "Stop here! Stop right now!" Jerry, completely startled by her sudden outburst, slammed his foot on the brake pedal. The heavy car screeched to a halt right in front of the massive, locked gates of Resurrection Cemetery. Jerry put the car in park and turned to look at her, deeply confused. "Mary, what's wrong? You live here? This is a cemetery." Mary didn't look at him. She was staring intently at the iron gates. She slowly reached for the handle of the passenger door. "You can't follow me," Mary said, her voice dropping back to that eerie, distant monotone. "Where I am going, you cannot go." And then, before Jerry's very eyes, Mary opened the heavy metal door of the car, stepped out onto the freezing, snow-covered asphalt, and firmly shut the door behind her. Jerry leaned over the passenger seat, wiping the condensation off the window, expecting to see her walking up to a caretaker's cottage or a nearby house. Instead, he watched as the young woman in the white dress walked directly up to the massive, locked wrought-iron gates of the cemetery. She didn't climb them. She didn't open them. She simply walked straight forward, and her physical body passed effortlessly through the solid iron bars, dissolving completely into the dark mist on the other side. Jerry Palus sat frozen in his idling car for what felt like hours, his mind completely shattered against the absolute impossibility of what he had just witnessed. He had held this woman. He had felt the physical weight of her body on the dance floor. He had heard her voice. smelled her perfume, and watched her physically open and close the heavy door of his car. And then he watched her dematerialize through solid iron. Eventually, operating purely on shock, Jerry drove home. But the encounter haunted him so deeply that he couldn't let it go. The next morning, desperate for answers, he drove to an address that Mary had vaguely mentioned earlier in the evening during their small talk. He found a modest house in a working-class Chicago neighborhood. He knocked on the door, and an older, deeply tired-looking woman answered. Jerry, stumbling over his words, explained that he was looking for a girl named Mary. He described her perfectly: the pale skin, the blonde bob, the beautiful white dress, the sheer stockings, the beaded clutch purse. As Jerry described the girl, the older woman's face drained of all color. Her hands began to tremble violently. She slowly stepped back, invited Jerry inside, and wordlessly pointed to a large, framed photograph sitting on the mantelpiece. Jerry looked at the photograph and felt his blood run entirely cold. Staring back at him from the frame, wearing the exact same white dress, the exact same shoes, and holding the exact same beaded clutch purse, was the girl he had danced with for hours just the night before. "That is my daughter, Mary," the older woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She was killed on Archer Avenue 5 years ago. She is buried in Resurrection Cemetery." Jerry Palus gave countless interviews about his encounter over the next several decades. He never changed a single detail of his story. He never profited from it. He simply told the truth of what happened to him on that freezing night in 1939. And he was not the last. For decades, highly credible witnesses, including a veteran Chicago police officer in 1976 who observed scorched handprints permanently burned into the metal of the cemetery gates, where a blonde girl had been violently shaking them, have reported picking up the incredibly physical, incredibly cold spirit of Resurrection Mary, only to watch her vanish into the dark history of Archer Avenue. And that is the sorrowful, chilling waltz of Resurrection Mary. It really makes you wonder, if you saw a girl in a white dress standing alone in the snow on Archer Avenue tonight, would you stop? Or would you keep driving? I'm Midnight Rider, and this has been Channel 19 Mysteries. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments, do you believe Jerry Palus danced with the impossible that night? We also want to hear from you. If you have your own stories, creepy encounters, or brushes with the paranormal, send them directly to mycreepyencounter@gmail.com. We might just feature your experience in a future transmission. Until next time, stay safe out there.